So, hello again, and we're going to continue now with the first poem of this book. But before starting, I think we will probably need to devote these 5 minutes to creating some context for the poems that we're about to read. So, the first poem is called Afterthoughts by Zhang Zhuling. Now, when was this poem written? Now, Zhang Zhuling lived in the first half of the 8th century, so he is roughly contemporaneous with the Muslim invasion of Spain, and he dies before the middle of the century, just before Abd al-Rahman I becomes an emir in Cordoba. What else can we say? So, who is Zhang Zhuling? Well, he belongs to the group of people that in this period of Chinese history are called the Shi, the scholar officials. So these were people who trained for the official examinations to become civil servants. And so he studied the Chinese Confucian classics and he practiced literature because part of the exams consisted of writing poems. Now, why is this relevant? Well, almost all of the poets from this book are going to be scholar officials, some of them in office or some of them trying to become civil servants. And the topics they're going to talk are going to be related to their social position. Another interesting thing to mention is that Zhang Zhuling comes from the south of China, so it would be appropriate to explain here that traditionally, China is very big, it's more a continent than a country. But traditionally, two big areas can be distinguished. The north part of the country, along the Yellow River Valley, the Huanghe, is the place that was the heartland of traditional Chinese culture, the oldest place to have civilization. It's a drier place, which requires good water management techniques and with a harsh climate. It's cold and snowy in winter, so a lot of the plants that are cultivated there are adapted to cold weather. So in cereals, millet and wheat and barley. Zhang Zhuling, as I said, comes from the south. In this period, the south was still only partly civilized, recently conquered by the northern Chinese. Most of the people in there didn't speak Chinese languages, and it had an exotic climate and weather for the northerners. This is relevant because natural images from the south will appear a lot in Zhang Zhuling's poems, things that for the northerners would have been exotic, like citrus trees or cinnamon or orchid flowers. These are typical and will appear in the poems. Finally, one last note about Chinese poetry in general. In one of the oldest texts about poetry, there is a quote from Confucius that says, "Poetry expresses what's in the heart with intention." And Confucius and this quote are going to be decisive for most of the history of Chinese poetry. Now, if poetry expresses what's in the heart, this might remind you romantic views of poetry, that poetry expresses feelings. But the old Chinese, and especially the scholar officials, gave it a twist. So it's not just what the poet feels, it's what the poet feels and thinks of politically speaking. So most Chinese poems written by scholars, whatever their superficial appearance, whatever they appear to be talking about, always have two levels of interpretation. The first is the literal meaning of the poem, which a lot of the time is a poem describing nature, and the metaphorical or figurative meaning of the poem, which is generally political criticism or something of the sort. So China was, during its imperial period, an absolute monarchy. You couldn't directly criticize the emperor, but it was accepted that you could, through a poem that indirectly criticized the emperor, his policies, express criticism. It was legitimate and accepted. So we will have to be looking for these double meanings in the poems that we're about to read.